Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host Cole Anderson, and I'm dedicating today's video to a very special supporter of the channel who wishes to remain anonymous, but who requested this piece specially. Apparently it's one that has a particularly special sentimental value, so this piece is for you. You know who you are. This was actually a piece that I'd never heard of before, so I was very happy to get this request. It's a rarely heard later piece from Robert Schumann. This particular piece comes from a collection of pieces, the Albumblätter of Opus 124, published in 1853. This is quite late in Schumann's career, so just for a bit of context, Schumann was born in 1810, and most of his greatest piano works were written during the 1830s. In general, Schumann went through periods of intense, almost frenetic compositional activity in a single genre, and then he would move on to something else and almost never write in that genre again. So the 1830s were his piano solo period, and most of his famous cycles and individual pieces come from this time. So, for example, the Papillon Opus 2, Toccata Opus 7, Carnival Opus 9, Kinderscenen Opus 15, Kreisleriana Opus 16, the Fantasy Opus 17, etc., etc. He wrote them all right in a row in the 1830s. He wrote music in no other genre at that time. I think his first 23 opus were all piano solo works, and that takes us up to the year 1839. After he completely gave up on being a concert pianist, likely because he was suffering from some form of focal dystonia, he wrote fewer piano solo works, although there are still some kind of sprinkled around later on in his career as well. But his next phase was the well-known Year of Song, the year 1840 to 1841. This was after he was finally married to Clara Wieck, Clara Schumann, as would be, in September of 1840. So during that roughly 1 year period, he wrote most of his most celebrated song repertoire, including the famous Dichterliebe song cycle, The Poet's Love, as well as the two collections called Liederkreis. Later on, in the course of the 1840s, he wrote his greatest chamber music works. So this includes the Piano Quartet, the Piano Quintet, and the two piano trios. The four symphonies also cover a period roughly from 1840 to 1850. In the 1850s, in the last few years of his compositional life, he became increasingly interested in large-scale choral works. He even wrote an oratorio before his death. It's not particularly well known, but it is there. Amid rapidly deteriorating mental health, Schumann attempted to commit suicide in 1854, and he was institutionalized at that time and never recovered, dying in 1856. So it wasn't necessarily an extraordinarily long compositional period, but it was extraordinarily active, and one that was also oddly obsessive and compartmentalized. And we see qualities of that in much of his music. It was in his personality. There's a sometimes obsessive focus on repeating rhythms, very frequently. Some kind of repeating rhythmic ostinato will run through an entire piece, usually in dotted rhythms. But in spite of that, there's always this amazing lyrical sense and a very interior, hidden, expressive world, the key to which can be found in much of the wonderful romantic literature that Schumann so much adored and which so much influenced his compositions. If you want to really understand Schumann's emotional world and what he was drawing on to compose these wonderful compositions, the works of E.T.A. Hoffmann and also Jean-Paul Richter are required reading. Neither of these writers is very well known now, but there are English translations of many of their greatest works that are available. In particular, the work Kater Murr, The Life and Opinions of the Tomcat Murr, was probably a big influence on the cycle Kreisleriana. Whereas the cycle Papillon, one of Schumann's first works, was undoubtedly inspired by Jean-Paul Richter's famous Flegeljahre, or Years of Flightiness. It's a difficult title to translate. Anyway, back to the Albumblätter. This publication was called for by the publisher, actually, after the enormous success of one of Schumann's rare later piano works, the Album for the Young, Opus 68, which was published in 1848. This is one of the rare late Schumann piano works that has really entered into the standard repertoire and which is very well known. It was extremely popular in its day, and it remains a treasured pedagogical work to the current day. I don't think it's ever really gone out of print. I oftentimes use it myself with students. It can be very useful for adults too. If you're at a kind of late beginning, early intermediate kind of level, it can really help to bridge a place where there's not a lot of great repertoire to play. I mean, many of these pieces are extraordinarily beautiful and well composed. So they're actually very interesting to play. And even some great artists like, I believe, Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli even played one or two of these pieces as encores from time to time. So definitely not just for kids. So the publisher wanted Schumann to provide a sequel. But at the time, Schumann was kind of busy with other things. He wasn't really interested in writing more piano music. So he just revived some earlier sketches of works that he had considered for earlier collections like Carnival or other collections like that, or just individual pieces that he'd written and never gotten around to publishing. Maybe he didn't think that they were quite up to snuff or something like that. Evidently, Schumann didn't want to miss out on the opportunity when he had a publisher clamoring for music from him, so he went back and got some of these older things and just kind of brought them together into one collection. Still, he was a little bit reluctant about bringing back these older pieces, which maybe he didn't consider to be his best work. He even considered titling the collection Spreu, I think is how you say it. It's a German word. It translates as chaff. So just kind of discarded old trinkets of no particularly great value. As you can imagine, the publisher didn't like that title, so we get the album Leaves instead. And this particular one comes from 1841 originally, so it's just at the beginning of his orchestral chamber music phase, and right after his production of piano music had started to really slow down. It's a simply gorgeous little miniature. It's sweet, beguiling, full of that kind of wistful magic, that kind of interior expression that was so peculiar to Schumann. I feel like this quality of Schumann's music makes it kind of difficult for the newcomer to really appreciate his music, but once you get into it, you find that it has such a rich emotional world. This approach is maybe best summed up by the German word innig, I-N-N-I-G, innig, which he used very frequently in his works as a direction for the performer. It's maybe best translated to something like intimate or interior, inward, something like that. This was Schumann's world, the inner world of imagination, and it's a simply radiant and beautiful world. It's a very simple melody in this piece, very disarming and enchanting in its simplicity. It returns many, many times, and I've chosen to vary my manner of playing the melody every time it comes back. So I realize this could be slightly controversial because Schumann hasn't written anything different about the melodies when they repeat. But I have the feeling, just from my knowledge of his music, that he probably would have expected the performer to be inspired in the moment and to supplement the kind of limited markings in order to really bring the music to life. So sometimes I play with a more generous sound, sometimes I play a little softer. There's one time where I play with a very, very little pedal to bring out the possible articulations, particularly in the accompaniment. So it sounds kind of like this. And one time, towards the end, I play it with a great deal of blurring in the pedal, almost like you're beginning to lose consciousness and slip into the dream world. So I fully think that the performer in a piece like this absolutely should use their imagination to really bring it to life. The form is a simple ternary form, A-B-A. It's unusual in that the B section is very brief. In fact, it's so short and evanescent that it's gone before you even realize it's there. It's kind of like just the hint of a bad dream, but it just vanishes as soon as you wake up. So please stay tuned for the full performance of this lovely piece. Also, please consider becoming a financial supporter of the channel through patreon.com/independent pianist. And thank you to all my current Patreon supporters and all my financial supporters outside of Patreon as well. I really couldn't do it without you. You're an integral part of me continuing to bring you this content. Also, if you happen to be interested in booking me for a live performance, you can drop me a line at cole@independentpianist.com. I'm always interested in giving concerts in intimate venues, house concerts, and the like, so just drop me a line if you're interested in that. Otherwise, just stay tuned. Until next week, we'll have some more great music for you. So until then, take care.